you're well known for talking about roadmaps. What are the biggest misconceptions about roadmaps and product management?
The biggest misconception is that it is a roadmap is a communication and alignment artifact.
Isn't that more like a vision rather than a roadmap?
The vision frames the roadmap. The roadmap is the how am I going to get to that vision.
Some teams struggle with roadmaps because leadership expects fixed delivery dates.
If everything has a fixed date, then we're just asking for trouble.
A lot of times the executives themselves are the people who affect the delays of the roadmap because they ask many changes.
Sometimes it's as simple as having that conversation and saying,
you said that roadmaps are prototypes for strategy. How can product leaders ensure their strategy is clear enough?
You're usually the biggest failure in an organization.
Super excited for another podcast episode. Today we have Phil. Phil, I'm super excited to talk to you today. Can you kindly please briefly introduce yourself?
How do I briefly introduce myself? I'm a product leadership coach. I'm writing a book about how you design and create your teams as a key decision in product work. I have a YouTube channel called Talking Roadmaps, which talks about roadmaps, or at least it did until the end of 70 episodes. And we're just about to start talking about product operations. But generally, I work with product leaders from head of product up to CPO in terms of one-to-one coaching or workshopping. And if we go back far enough, I'm an engineer who became a product leader and did a bunch of other things along the way. Mostly in B2B, but I just love product work and the kind of holistic model of product where you take a much more commercial perspective on things.
Love it. The word brief is tricky because sometimes some guests go for like a 10-minute explanation about themselves, which is not a problem. It's just they go from their childhood and things like that. And sometimes people just introduce themselves in like 10 seconds. And it's very interesting. And that kind of always helps me navigate to the next questions. And I looked into your LinkedIn. You had a fascinating journey from full stack engineering to product leadership coaching. What was the turning point that made you switch to coaching?
Switch to coaching. So that'd be about 7 years ago. And the thing that switched there was, frankly, I just realized that I didn't fit in the job I was in anymore. I had been really recruited to break things, change things, to create a modern digital product organization in a large traditional German organization. And for the first few years, I was praised every time I did something. And then it got to the point where I was no longer being praised for it. I was actually getting into trouble for doing the things I was hired for. And it's like, I don't fit here anymore. And I had this realization that coaching had always been my leadership style. Training had been a tool and technique that I'd used throughout my career, both externally and internally. As a case in point, I remember someone in that same role saying to me, I've never had a manager who invested so much time and energy in my growth. And it's like, shit, man, that's my job. The better you are, the easier my life is. So that's where I'm going to spend my time and energy. And so it was that recognition of that being a style of how I worked and how I could do that externally. And frankly, for 15 years, I'd wanted my own business. It's like, well, this is a great way to go down that path.
That's very interesting. And I like that how you felt you and the environment and you just try to shift and find the best place which fits you or the role. I know that you emphasize helping product leaders think clearly and make strong decisions. What are some of the most common challenges you see product leaders struggling with? Let's pause here for a second. The other day, I was looking into our channel analytics and I noticed many of you guys are watching a lot of our episodes but not yet subscribed to our YouTube page or Spotify. I will ask you as a favor, please support us by subscribing to our YouTube page and Spotify page, and I will promise you I will do everything in my power to make each episode better and better. Thank you.
I mean, the sorts of issues they have are so diverse. But the one I'm really double clicking on at the moment is designing their organization, designing their teams. How are they set up? I keep finding myself having that conversation with leaders. I'm in a general coaching environment and I need to reorganize my team, I think. Where do we start? How should I organize them? What boundaries do I put between them? What structure do I give them? And you would think this would be relatively well understood by now, but it's not. Like, heck, even some people don't know what the difference is between a team and, say, a work group. A work group being a bunch of people who happen to do the same work versus a team that actually has interdependence, works together, brings different complementary skills. So when we say the product team, too often people think they mean the product management department. No. Most of the time they're barely a team, if at all. In fact, that's something I spent a lot of my time on in my previous role, was rebuilding them into a real team. Creating simple rituals and ways of working that meant that they had to collaborate. I forced collaboration within the group. Because sometimes they'd be coming to me for help and I'd be saying, but the person who can help is sat next to you. But there wasn't that collaboration because they just happened to do the same work. And so figuring out how to structure your team is, I guess, not the most common one in the long term that I've come across, but I think one of the more acute and bigger ones. Because essentially this is a bet. This is one of the biggest bets you can make. Where do I put my resources? In a waterfall world, we used to do a load of work, write PRDs and BRDs and MRDs and figure out, right, we're going to do this big initiative. Right, now let's resource it. In a more modern, agile, even post-agile world, we tend to instead fund a team. Well, that's great. We can get past the storming and norming and have a team that kind of knows how to work together. But if they don't have a consistent mission, then it also undermines their ability to. And so creating that environment where they know where they're going, they know how to work together, they know who to collaborate with and when and where, is so fundamental to actually creating a high-performing team. And the reality is, a low-performing team costs about the same amount of money as a high-performing team. So if it's not getting the ROI, we've got a problem.
And how do you increase the collaboration between the teams?
Well, I have to give the classic answer of it depends. Every team, every organization is different. But the first thing is thinking about how do you divide your organization? How do you slice it up? And I usually end up using 4 parameters as my first way of slicing a product organization. One is, which persona are they serving? Which customer are they serving, really? Secondly, what's their North Star metric? What needle should be moving to know that they're being successful? And this is bigger than your OKRs. This is a long-term persistent metric that you know is going the right direction. You have your problems that you solve. Marty Kagan would say that product teams are empowered with problems to solve. And I absolutely agree. We've got to understand that we're making bets about where to put our resources as leaders. And which problems we think are worth solving are some of those big bets. And then the people we put behind solving those problems, the teams, that's that next part. And so the problems we're solving, how do we measure success for it? Who are we solving the problems for? And maybe we end up in part of the journey as well. But then you've got different cadences as well, different speeds of working. We can think about teams being relatively fast. Growth teams run super fast. They have experiments running daily, but maybe aren't going quite so deep in the product, but they're about optimization. You have more feature-oriented teams that run at a little bit slower cadence, or expanding the capabilities of the product, building much more capability. You have platform teams, similar sort of speed, maybe a little bit slow, but they're helping deal with dependencies, or sometimes creating dependencies, but helping have those shared services so that every team doesn't have to build the same thing 3 times over. I've even come across like deep research teams where their cadence is more like they're going to deliver every, 6 to 12 months, and that's if they're successful. And then you've got to productize that, and that runs so much more slowly. And so you've got to figure out, one, how do I decide which things that each of these teams go after? And that different decision-making cycle, the rituals, how do they all interface with each other as well? Like, if I use the Spotify model as a little bit of a reference, I know it never really existed, but as a concept, it's actually founded on some super old, super well-established leadership and organizational design principles. You have the tribes. Well, tribes are basically where we say this group of product teams are closely related. Inside a tribe, you tend to get a lot better collaboration than across tribes. Well, that means that where you put people in your organization, which pods or squads or teams you put together, is going to massively influence how effective they are. If you put other people in other tribes over here and versus here, then their collaboration is going to be worse. So you've got to think about, what are you optimizing for? Is there a reason for it to be over here and over here? Or is there a reason that actually they're going to be collaborating and put them together? And then how do we build those rituals and the times when they come together to actually collaborate? And I can't give you here's the one size fits all. What I can do is create a process. What I can do is create a process, more of a workshopping style approach to, this is how we can work through it as a team, figuring out those different aspects.
What rituals, when you talk about rituals, what rituals have you seen work to increase the collaboration within the team?
I mean, what I've seen work would be every possible answer, because some rituals work really well somewhere and some work really bad somewhere. Like a stand-up is a classic ritual that works super well for some teams, works terribly for others. A program increment planning kind of once a quarter works really well for some teams and terrible for others. A shape-up style 6-weekly planning increment or planning sort of window, that works really well for some teams and terribly for others. And in fact, what I encourage teams to do is to actually take an experimental approach. Try something. Have an idea. In fact, when I was trying to turn my product management department into a product management team, one of the things I introduced were simply stand-ups. I borrowed from the agile world and said, okay, let's get us talking. Instead of you waiting for a one-to-one with me and asking me the question, let's all talk together. Quick status update. What happened yesterday that we all need to know about? What are you focusing on today? By the way, don't tell me about your meetings in either of those, because I do not give a damn. And lastly, what help do you need? Where are your blockers? And then subtly we also added on what I called office hours. So we had a 15-minute stand-up and 45 minutes of office hours. That meant we were all available for 45 minutes after this to help each other. And so I might say, right, Keith, you go off with Amir. You guys can sort it. Emmanuel, I'm going to come with you. Let's figure this out. And as a team, we'd go and address these things together and help each other during that time. If we didn't need it, we cancelled it and got the time back. Now, that mechanism worked really well for us as a team, but for a while, I was also leading another product management team that sat next to them, and it didn't work very well there. What we figured out is we just needed to run it at a lower cadence. So that one was just 2 or 3 times a week, because that team moved more slowly. There was less happening. It didn't make sense to be with them every single day because it just became an overhead. And so recognizing that, iterating, I used to use an email client called Lotus Notes. It is undoubtedly the worst email software on the planet. But it makes sense as soon as you realize it is really a database viewer. It's not an email client, it's a database viewer. And if you're a software engineer, all of a sudden that makes sense and you can use it effectively. But it's a database editor or viewer that loses entries. And by that I mean meetings would just suddenly disappear from your calendar. And that it was just random when they'd go. And that forced a behaviour in me. It forced a behaviour that I would only ever set a meeting to run for 3 months if it was recurring. At the end of those 3 months, I'd rerun them. I'd reschedule them. But then I realised, hold on a second, nobody's asking for this meeting. If nobody's asking for it, then it's probably not very valuable. So next time I do a scheduled session, I'm going to schedule it for 3 months as an experiment. If nobody wants it, if nobody asks for me to reschedule it, then that experiment has demonstrated that that meeting is not valuable. Let's throw it away. And that kind of realization made me very much take this iterative and experimental approach to all my team practices. What's working here and what's working there? I'm going to try something. I'm going to set some criteria for what good looks like a meeting. If nobody wants it to be rescheduled, it's not going to be rescheduled. That's the success criteria. And then I'm going to try that with all my team rituals, with all my team interactions.
It's very interesting. I work for companies that the busier your calendar was, the more effective you were. And it was just nightmare. And then I started working with teams that they were like really trying to minimize the number of meetings and also including you when you really had to be included. Especially as a product manager, I feel like whatever happens in the company, we are somehow involved or we have to know. So you're just spending the whole week in meetings and you're not actually really doing much. You're just coordinating here and there.
I mean, there is something to be said. Meetings get a lot of stick for being bad, a waste of time, this sort of thing. I have to say, as a product manager, they're actually one of your key places where work gets done, because product management is a high degree about communication, and meetings are a key opportunity to communicate, to align, to collaborate. So eliminating them completely for me, just doesn't make sense. I know there are fully async companies. I struggle with that idea. But setting the right SLAs for different communication channels, like if I need something really urgently, I'm going to call you right now. If it's within the next half hour, I'm going to send you a Slack message. If it's sometime in the next 48 hours, I'd like you to look at it, then I'm going to email you. And knowing those different things. And if it's something that needs collaboration, not just to share information. Now, a meeting that just is a transmit-only session, waste of time. That meeting could have been an email, or at best, maybe you record a short video of it and share that out to make it a little more human. And then you schedule a Q&A session afterwards, or even an asynchronous Q&A session in Slack, where you give people the opportunity to ask those questions, but you make a point of ensuring that there's the backwards and forwards, the collaboration and the interaction when you can be live, versus if it's just transmit, don't waste your time on it.
Also, what I notice sometimes is other team members pull you into the meetings to be like the judge of the meeting between the designer and engineer, or multiple of the engineers. They kind of want to show who did the work better and whose fault it is. And then you're like, please, guys. I feel like if you a little bit try to, sometimes you need to step in, right? But sometimes if you just try to a little bit stay a bit far away from that, you increase the responsibility within the team that, guys, this is a feature, this is the area that you're supposed to handle. So kind of really kindly figure it out, If it's really not working, involve me. Not every week going through the same features and then it just doesn't make any sense. We're not going to progress. I think as a product manager, you have to know when to step in and when not to.
And there's a really interesting dynamic that you're essentially referring to there. So there's this tacit assumption in many product teams that the product manager is the decider. Now, all knowledge work, engineering, design, product, is all about decisions. Decisions are the heart of all product work and all knowledge work. And we tend to fall into one of two models where we end up with one decider that's always the same person. Often it's expected to be the product manager, or we fall into, we've got to find consensus. So we've all got to get in the room and all get to an agreement. Well, the reality is consensus is usually the worst decision-making model you can have. It's slow and it tends to not recognize breakthrough opportunities because we find the lowest common denominator, the most simple, the one that everyone can accept, as opposed to the one with a few pointy bits on it that actually might make you stand out and be better. And if we think of only the product manager as the decider, well, we're missing understanding who is actually the most qualified, the best person to make each decision. So I tend to err towards what's called participative decision making, where we have a conversation like, yeah, consult me as the product manager, but if it's a design decision, designer, I want you to decide. If it's a technical decision, engineer, I want you to decide, because you are better qualified than me to make that. Now, I'm a former engineer, so I'm also stupidly dangerous in terms of technical decisions because my technical knowledge is somewhere back like 15 years ago. But people sometimes have expected me to make them. But I also want to recognize that often the product manager has more context than anybody else. So they need to share that context. They need to give it to the rest of the team so they understand the environment that decision is being made in. Because sometimes there is a reason that the product managers end up making the decision. It's because the designer, the engineer are completely ignoring the business context. Like, we need to do this because the CEO said so, and the reason they've said that is because there's something else happening, which even we might not know as the product manager. It might be a merger and acquisition that's taking place, or the strategic partnership that's taking place. Like, there are some decisions actually that come from above, or that some decisions you have to pass up to say, I can't make this decision, or I believe we should make this particular decision. Here's my recommendation, but I don't have the empowerment to make that decision. It's out of my zone as well. Not just the product manager, not just the design, not just the engineer. Even within the product team, we might not be able to make some decisions. And that's okay. Some people get really hung up on the fact that, no, we're disempowered, we're not autonomous. Well, everyone operates within a constraint. When we design those teams, it's like, what are the constraints? What is the mission? What's the box that they operate in? And then if it's going outside of that, how do we need to evolve for the next layer?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And you're well known for talking about roadmaps. In your opinion, what are the biggest misconceptions about roadmaps and product management?
The biggest misconception is that it is a fixed plan. We are doing this on this date and we are going to ship this on this date, and everything that's shown on there is absolutely rock solid. A roadmap is a communication and alignment artifact. It's not a plan. It shows direction of travel. It shows a degree of prioritization. It shows what we are thinking about. And in the shorter term, it's probably really pretty solid. In the longer term, it's, well, we kind of have an idea where we're going. Like 2 years ago, everyone had AI on their 3 to 5 year roadmap. Yeah, we're going there sometime. It'd been on the 3 to 5 year roadmap for 3 to 5 years at that point. Then 2 years ago, OpenAI burst onto the scene with ChatGPT, and everyone started taking it seriously, and everything got pulled in. So the things that were 3 years out started to become this year or maybe next year, and that meant that other things got thrown out, things that people thought were certain. I'm a big believer in trying to move away from time-based roadmaps to more, I actually prefer to think of it as activity-based roadmaps. So when people talk about now, next, and later, I prefer to switch that language to deliver, discover, and explore. So deliver is the next 3 months typically. We know what we're going to ship. We can actually talk about features there because we know. We've done the work. Discover is the next time box, and it's basically saying these are the things that we're trying to understand the problem on, and we're evaluating solutions for. And then explore is where we're really high level problems. We're exploring. We're trying to find the right problems that are worth us addressing. And the reason I changed the language from now, next, and later is because when many people look at a roadmap that says later, the sales team in particular, they look and say, later, that means you're not doing anything on it now. Why aren't you working on my thing now? When the reality is you are working on it, but you're trying to understand it to see if it's worthwhile doing any more on. So you're doing lightweight work. It's just not your heavy focus on delivery. And so that shift to more activity-based instead of time-based changes that perspective, because they can see you are doing something on what you're doing. And it just helps communicate. I also think that people don't do enough storytelling or create enough versions of the art, different views of the artifact. I believe there should be one roadmap, but probably up to 5 different views of it for different audiences. And with each of those, it's telling a story. We have to understand what the different audiences care about. Like, your sales team might just care about what features are going to be shipped when. Blasphemy, I know, but okay, just give them the next 3 months and say, this is what's coming in the next 3 months, because we know. And leave it at that. They get the certainty that they want. You're just not showing them the longer term. Your senior leadership don't really care about what features are coming in the next few months. They want to know what you're going to do over the next 5 years, because that helps them have the conversation with their investors. So you show a very different view. It's still the same content. It's just a different view, a different time horizon. And by telling the story around it, we help them understand where we're going with the product, how we're going to create customer and business value.
When you talk about long term, isn't that more like a vision rather than a roadmap?
Sort of. I'd say that the vision frames the roadmap. The roadmap is the how am I going to get to that vision. It's kind of steps along the way. And often I even change the visuals so they're not just a timeline. And my favorite is actually what I call a radial diagram, where it's like a radar. It starts with a circle in the middle, comes out and out. And it's getting further and further away. And all of a sudden we're talking about these are on our radar. These are the things we think will help us achieve our vision. Because a vision might be 5 or 10 years out. In fact, here's my perspective. The vision that you create isn't what your product is going to do. It's the future that your customer will experience. The mission is what you are going to do to help them achieve that experience. You're not necessarily going to do everything. The future world is not just created by you. It's created by other people in your ecosystem, in the environment. And you're doing part of creating that future vision. And your roadmap is how are you going to fulfill your mission to help create that vision.
That's very interesting. I really like that. And can you share a success story where a well-structured roadmap significantly improved team alignment?
A success story. Maybe I'm going to give you an example. Maybe it's not quite a team one, but this is a leadership example. It is a relatively fresh to mind one, where a CPTO that I was working with came to me and said, my CEO has asked me for a roadmap. I said, great. My next question to him was, though, what does he mean by a roadmap? And the CPTO looked at me and said, what do you mean? A roadmap's a roadmap, right? I said, aha, no. What is he hiring this roadmap to do? What does he really want from it? What is he looking for? I often find the most concrete way of addressing that is actually to look at the visuals. How is it represented? What are we going to kind of show them? And so I've done what I call essentially a design sprint for your roadmap a number of times. And as part of that, there's an activity called lightning demos. In a lightning demo, you literally ask people to go and scour the web to find examples of visualizations and things that you could use for your roadmap. Now, we've derived 14 different visual patterns from that. But one of them actually came from this conversation with the CPTO, because I gave him a Miro board full of a couple of hundred different visuals and said, go and chat with your CEO and ask him what he's looking for. After about 4 or 5 of them saying, oh, that gives it a bit, that gives a bit more of it, no, it's not quite right, the CEO stopped and said, just a second. I've got exactly what I want. It's in the investor deck from 3 years ago. I just need an updated version of it. And he went and he pulled this slide deck up. And it was what I call a territory diagram now. It's a square, a larger square just going up and to the right, and another larger square going up and to the right again. It's really simple as a visual. And it has a short bulleted list inside each of those squares. And the communication is, this is the territory that we're going to take over. This is how we're going to grow our position in the market. We're going to go from serving customers in these ways to these ways and then to these bigger ways, which allows us to grow our total addressable market and therefore our share of market. And that allowed the CEO to then go away and have the right conversation with the investors about where they were going.
That's interesting. What I notice, some teams struggle with roadmaps because leadership expects fixed delivery dates. I'm sure that you have seen this a lot. How do you navigate these conversations with the executives or different stakeholders?
With care. If I'm the individual contributor, I have to do it with a little bit of care. So the question I usually start with is trying to understand, I'll go back to what are they hiring the roadmap for? What do they want to achieve? What's it going to help them do? I apply a jobs to be done concept to the roadmap itself. And so I start asking them about why that date is important. Now, in 90% of times, you usually find out it's a date that's been manufactured arbitrarily because they believe, based on older school methodologies and mindset, that putting a date and forcing a timeline is powerful and helps achieve something. And in some environments, that works. In many, it leads to suboptimal outcomes. Otherwise known as doing shit work. If you can start to eliminate some of the noise and get down to the ones that really do matter. And sometimes there are things that matter, usually driven by external dates, like a trade show, CES is happening, or Mobile World Congress is happening. They can be examples. Or a change in legislation, or a contract, or something along those lines that is driving a particular date. Then I have this really pragmatic perspective of, okay, some fixed dates make sense. Again, I'll use Marty as a reference. He has a concept called a high integrity commitment. And I love this concept because it's about saying some things can have fixed dates. If everything has a fixed date, then we're just asking for trouble because everything takes longer than you really expect and it always moves to the right. But if you have a small number of fixed dates, then generally you can hit them because other things move instead. You allow other things to slip because they're not fixed. A high integrity commitment has a number of facets to it, and most people miss this. They think, yes, we'll just commit to this date. Actually, the first thing you have to do is the feasibility work. You do not commit to a date until you've actually worked out, can I do this thing? Product work comes down to 4 key risks. Is it valuable to the customer? Is it viable for us as a business? Is it usable for our end users? And is it feasible to even do it? Now, ideally, we deal with all 4 risks before we deliver something. But you can't not deal with feasibility and be able to deliver it. If it's not feasible, you can't deliver. So that's the minimum risk you've got to deal with. And so usually it kind of transpires in a way that you say, okay, I understand the urgency of that date and the importance of it. Give me a couple of days to go away and work with my team and just make sure that we can deliver it and by that date. And ideally, I'd like to just have a few conversations with customers to make sure it's valuable as well. You go where you do the discovery work, and as a team, not as a product manager, as a team, you make the commitment to deliver. And that's what makes it high integrity. It's not just me as the product manager promising that, yeah, these people over here, these engineers, they'll work the weekend, they'll deal with it. It's us as a team saying, we will absolutely hit this line. And then when it comes to it, we do it. We deliver. We ship that thing on that date. But we understand, and leadership understands and accepts, that other things around it might move. So I think of it almost like there's a rock in the middle of the stream. The water's going to flow around it. Some of the other features are going to move, but that rock has to stay in the same place.
It's also very interesting that a lot of times the executives themselves are the people who, in a way, affect the delays of the roadmap, because they ask many changes to the feature or the product, which was not necessarily part of the initial scope in the day one. And then for them, especially if the executive team is non-technical, for them it's like, yeah, but it's a button and can you just change the color? And I mean, they have to run a business. It's not their fault, but that's also something that I have seen affects these delays. But you can't necessarily tell them that it's your fault, which is not their fault. It's just their request will have this impact. So
sometimes it's as simple as having that conversation and saying, yes, we can do that. What else is less important? What else should we not do? And they'll usually then scramble. It's like, well, no, you've got to do everything. It's like, we can't do everything. You've given us limited resource. This is the team we have to do this. If you want us to do this thing, we're going to have to either delay or not do something else. So you turn into a this over this, an X or Y decision, instead of a yes or a no decision.
That's also right. In your experience, what separates great product decision makers with an average ones?
Curiosity. I mean, and that's in all product work. You have to be interested in care. And I think the next most important thing is being open to different data or different information. In fact, there are many organizations that have a default decision-making model. They default to a single source of truth. We hear about words like founder mode a couple of months ago, where it was like, really, that means intuition-driven leadership. That means we're being driven by what a small number of people think are the answers, and mostly based on very small amounts of data or evidence. And some organizations default to just intuition-driven. Others really push that they are data-driven and it's all about quantitative information, and that's how they make decisions. Again, that misses a lot of the point. Data tells you nothing. It's very rare that if you look at some data, there's a simple, very clear answer. Usually it requires some interpretation, some analysis to actually find an answer. And that's where qualitative information comes in. Evidence or feedback or anecdotes, whatever you want to call it. And so to me, and some people just rely on that voice of customer in that more anecdote-based model. So they have a default there as well. We listen to our customers. We're customer-driven. The reality is it's somewhere the best approach is somewhere in the middle. I think it was Ravi Mehta who exposed me to this concept of the 3 lenses. And it just resonates so much with me that you need to bring a balance between that intuition, that feedback, and the data. I tend to phrase that combination these days as evidence informed. And we might start with one and end with another one. Let's take an example. Say our customer success and customer support team are getting a lot of complaints about something. Complaints, that's qualitative, that's feedback, that's anecdotes. We're going to read them and say, right, there's a problem somewhere, a particular area in our product. Let's dive into the data. Let's see what we're actually seeing. Because it might be a tiny sample and therefore we want to see if it's real and broader. So you dive into the data and you see a bunch of potential causes coming out based on the purely quantitative information. And then when you look at the list, it's like, yeah, the one that's at the top just doesn't ring true. It doesn't feel right. My product sense, I hate the phrase, by the way, but my product sense, my spidey sense says it's wrong, which is really my 25 years of product experience coming through saying that's just, I don't normally experience that as the real thing. It's usually the second one on the list that's the problem. So let's go and address the second one on the list. So there we started with qualitative, we went to quantitative, and then we finished with intuition. We used all three of those lenses to make that choice. And explicitly calling that out and thinking about those three things and making that really clear and tacit, or in fact, that tacit knowledge explicit, I think is a super important part of decision making.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You said something very interesting. You said that roadmaps are prototypes for strategy. So how can product leaders ensure their strategy is clear enough to drive a good decision making?
I wish I could claim to have come up with that phrase, but that's actually a Jana Bastow quote. It's roadmap being a prototype for your strategy, but your question still remains. The reality is that the strategy is usually the biggest thing that's a failure in an organization. Strategy at its heart is about making choices, making decisions of saying we are going to go this direction and not that direction. And most strategies don't do that. They give us platitudes. They say we want to be number one in the market. Okay, how? What is going to make us different to the other 10 companies that are doing the same thing as us? What is our unique point of view? What choices are we going to make on how we're going to move forwards? And what choices are we going to leave behind and not do? Because we can't do everything. We've got to make choices. And it's the lack of choices. Ultimately, your roadmap is it's the next layer of decision. It's like we've got the choices on our strategy. Now, how do we create a path that implements that strategy and takes us to that vision? If we haven't got choices, then anything can fit on that roadmap. And therefore, we can't create a coherent one that takes us the right direction. So it's the lack of decisions, and particularly the lack of saying, I'm not going to do this.
That's very true. Personally, it really also resonates with me. We're slowly getting close to the end of the podcast episode. I want to ask you, what's one piece of career advice you wish you had received earlier in your journey?
See, I'm torn. Part of me says be intentional, make intentional choices. But the other part of me says do the complete opposite. And I can't decide which half of me wins, because what I've always done in my career is follow the things that I enjoy. And I found product to be a place that I enjoy and I love the work. If I wasn't enjoying what I was doing every day, I'd be doing something different. It's as simple as that. That is my absolute kind of core philosophy, because you might chase money. And yes, there are certain careers that pay better. Product management's a reasonably well-paid career. It's really hard to get into at the moment, but it's a reasonably well-paid career to be in. But if you're not enjoying it, then you are spending 8 hours a day, at least, doing things you're not enjoying. And if you're a knowledge worker, you generally have the option to do things that you are enjoying. Don't waste half of your life, because reality is 8 hours a day. There are 24 in a day. 8 of them you're going to sleep. 8 of them you're going to work. 8 of them you're going to do something else. And a lot of those are going to be chores. So if you're wasting a third of your life, but it's really half of your waking life, it's not going to be fulfilling. So be intentional, but let the river carry you to to find places that are fun and that you enjoy.
That's very beautiful. Phil, for the listeners, where can they contact you? Where can they find you?
So the best place to find me is LinkedIn. I'm just Phil Hornby. Just look for the bright orange. I'm easy to spot. Or For Product People, that's FOR, not the number, .com. That's my website. Or talkingroadmaps.com would be another place. Yeah, just look, LinkedIn's usually easiest and you'll find everything else from there.
Folks, make sure to check out his podcast as well. Phil has a very great podcast and he interviewed so many great product leaders from around the world. Phil, thank you so much for joining this podcast episode. It was a pleasure talking with you. And I can see that all the books that you have back in the shelf, you have a lot of them in your mind. And you have a lot of wisdom in the product space.
I try that. That's why I'm trying to write my own as well. In fact, I put my first chapter out to my early readers club only last night. I'm looking forward to getting my feedback. Been a pleasure being here, Amir.
Thank you. Wow, you made it till the end. I'm very proud of you. Comment down below which part of the podcast did you like the most and who should I interview next. Also, on the screen, you will see a lot of our other great episodes that you should definitely check out.